Prakash, start.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
the
sir.
stream is live. Okay.
Good evening to all. Today, I will organize a special lecture. Uh, uh, Chairperson Professor Pradip Basu and Speaker Dr. Teivo Teivinian. Today's topic is use and misuse of Swastika in European politics. So I will over to Professor Pradip Basu, today's chairperson. Sir, please start.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Teivo Teivainen. Uh, in my Bengali term, maybe pronunciation is not exact, not correct, maybe.
It's very
Thank you
good.
very much. Thank you very much for being here. Uh, Let me introduce. First, I will introduce the Rashtrobigyan Chorcha Kendro. It is a Bangla name, uh, Bengali name, that means Political Science Study Center. Rashtrobigyan Chorcha Kendro. This organization, it is an academic platform, and it was set up after or during the COVID-19, when people came to resort to online discussions on a very wide scale, and they are continuing seminars and webinars uh, in uh, for last 3 years. Around 400 seminars and webinars have been organized by them, and there are 10,000 members, including a huge number of students, particularly students of political science, and also PhD scholars, and also school teachers, and also college and university teachers. And we have this audience, a large section, around 600 to 1000 attend these lectures. And they not only arranged for such academic seminars and discussion webinars, they also help the poor students in remote village areas in Purulia, Bankura, etc. in West Bengal. They distribute free books, clothes, and also arrange for free uh, blood donation camps and medical camps, etc. And they, uh, which is very unusual for academic platforms, that they many times organize discussions in Bangla language. Uh, of course, they also organize in English. And I thank Advocate Prakash Chakraborty, who was a student of political science and now he is an advocate in the legal profession. He is who is the main organizer, and also there are Professor Shomiram Das, and there are many other people who are engaged, involved in this initiative. I am grateful to them for inviting me to chair several discussions so far. And then uh, I will thank again Dr. Teivo Teivainen, uh, and for being here. And I will give a brief introduction. Dr. Teivainen is professor of world politics at the University of Helsinki, Finland. We know a Scandinavian country, and he is the chair of the Finnish National UNESCO Commission. His awards include Hopkins Award of the American Sociological Association, Outstanding Activist Scholar Award of the International Studies Association, and Amartya Sen Prize of Yale University. Amartya Sen In this connection, we can mention that he is from India, particularly from West Bengal. He spent a long time of his life in Kolkata, uh, although Shantiniketan is his home place, Rabindranath Thakur's Shantiniketan. Well, Dr. Teivainen uh, is currently finalizing a book on the transnational uses of the hooked cross. Hooked cross stands for Swastika symbol. Swastika symbol. Uh, he has many books to his credit. I will mention only a few. Uh, Democracy in Movement, the World Social Forum as a Political Process, published from Routledge. It is forthcoming. Then, in Finnish language, World Political National Work. And then Brasilia, that is Brazil, uh, published from Helsinki, jointly authored. Then Impasse of the Corporate Responsibility. I am giving only the English translation of the titles of the books because I don't know Finnish language. And also the Universidad Nacional Mayor de San Marcos, title is Lima. Then a possible world democratic transformation of global institutions from Jade Books. And there are many others, sometimes jointly written, like Global Democracy from Jade Books. And then Enter Economism, Exit Politics. Experts, Economic Policy and Damage to Democracy from Jade Books. There are many other books, and recently it will be interesting for our audience that he has presented a lecture at Nepal. Now, we are really grateful to him. And just about the topic, that is use and misuse of Swastika in European politics. I will very briefly introduce the topic because we are earnestly eager, the audience is eager to hear the speaker. I'll just briefly mention that when I was born in a middle class Hindu family in Kolkata, we have been seeing this symbol of Swastika, and it was considered as an auspicious symbol, ensuring prosperity, peace, and then I have noticed a few variations in our culture also. Then when I grew up, we have learned a lot about Nazi genocide of the Jews in Germany under Hitler's regime, who came in power in 1933. And with the genocide, we have heard about concentration camps, gas chambers, brutal, inhuman experiments with the Jews, their bodies, their minds, and millions of Jews were killed. And Nazi rule, it is very similar to fascist rule of Mussolini in Italy, which came to power in 1920s, early 1920s. This Nazi regime in Germany, they used the swastika symbol. It might seem very interesting to our students of political science, students and teachers, and also those belonging to the social sciences, that we always associated swastika symbol with Nazi regime. But we also have in mind that in our Hindu culture, uh, I don't believe in any religion right at the moment, but by birth I was a Hindu, and we remember that in Hindu tradition, this swastika was very much, this symbol was very much used. Now, the question often haunted us that it is a Hindu symbol of prosperity, peace, an auspicious symbol. How could it be? Could it become the symbol of the ferocious, brutal Hitlerite regime? That is really a big question for us, and how they are connected. And this mystery is going to be opened up by our respected speaker. And later, we also learned that there have been a series of researches, and swastika is not only an Indian Hindu symbol. There are several variations, and it can be found in ancient Chinese culture, Japanese culture, and in Buddhism, in Jainism, and also, even to my surprise, I noticed that it was found in Hungary, it was found in American culture, and in different parts of Europe. That is very interesting. So I leave it to Professor Teivo, Teivainen. Over to him.
Thank you, Dr. Basu. This was a very kind, generous introduction. And I hope I will be able to share some light on the questions you mentioned, also the connection between the symbol used in India in dharmic religions, especially Hinduism, and the one used in Germany, and Nazi Germany more particularly. Perhaps first, a question of terminology, you mentioned also the term hooked cross and swastika, and there's often confusion, and to me it's happened when I've been speaking or writing in informal international contexts about the symbol, and I use the term swastika in English to refer to the symbol used in Europe, in Germany, for example, or Finland, and sometimes Indians, people of Indian origin, get very upset and say, no, don't call it swastika. Swastika is our religious symbol. Yours is hooked cross. As the name says, it's connected with Christianity, and that's why you should always call it hooked cross, or in German, Hakenkreuz. And so in many academic debates and other debates, the term swastika is often used to refer to the similar pattern, similar figure, similar design, similar symbol in different parts. I try to use hooked cross as a more general symbol without making the claim that cross refers to Christianity only. And therefore, in my normal use of the language, swastika would be one example of a hooked cross general symbol, but not all hooked crosses are swastikas. There was also, this is, as the title of the talk says, this was and is often claimed to be one of the misuses of the swastika term in Europe. Some people, especially in India, I've noted, refer to the fact that the New York Times in 1920s at some point stopped using the German origin word Hakenkreuz, meaning hooked cross, of the symbol associated with the 10 rising political star Adolf Hitler, and started referring to the swastika. And this would have happened in 1920s, and it was a mistranslation. However, it's also true that swastika was used as a term to refer to the symbol also in Europe already in the 19th century. But in any case, with that symbol, we have several variations. It's recognizable that we're talking more or less of the same figure, same pattern. but sometimes it's whether it points to the right or points to the left. Like in India, you sometimes say swastika, and different. You have swastika, different emphasis there. How you pronounce whether it's left facing, right facing. Sometimes called clockwise turning or anti-clockwise turning. Sometimes there's a debate about what it means, if it's tilted or not tilted. And the colors are also often important. So we can refer to some of these differences in design of this symbol. And many of the debates I've been studying about Finland and about the world, about the use of swastika, are related to the fact that in many, many places, one of the key history political intentions in talking about the swastika say, look, it's our swastika and it's different from that swastika. That swastika meaning Hitler's Nazi swastika. And this is particularly important in Finland. I don't know, was I able to show something from slides here, or doesn't really matter? I have a couple. If
Please show. That will make it more interesting.
okay, but since I'm not so familiar with this, let me just see.
Do you have PPT slides?
I have some PPTs. They are not necessary. Now I'm trying to actually present it right now, but it might not.
Or you can show some pictures if you want.
Yes, I'm using PowerPoint. Okay, I should have PowerPoint here and now and here. Okay, it's uploading. I'll show you in a second when it's uploaded. So in any case, my interest in the topic as a person from Finland is related to many things. As a teenager, I was traveling around in Asia, in India. I was planning to become an India scholar. And of course, I saw swastikas in many places, also in Thailand, in Japan, and many other places. I was also, by the way, last month or the month of December and November traveling around Asia and in places where swastika use or whatever the local name for the symbol is still relatively prevalent, especially Mongolia and India. And we can come back to these different Asian uses of the symbol because you might be interested in it. But my main topic here is the European use of the swastika. Though these are connected in the sense that in Europe, there's been a lot of debate on whether the origins of the symbol used in Europe, whether they are in India, and these interpretations have changed. As I will argue, one of my findings and arguments has been that in Germany and to some extent in Finland, with their sort of more political use of the symbol of the hooked cross to make claim that it represents our European nation and even our white European nation, then the attempts to locate its historical roots in Asia became less prevalent, which is an interesting case of history politics. But let's not go there yet. Is a slide visible? So someone give me a permission to. You don't see my slide, right? You don't see a hooked cross now anywhere. Share screen. I'm afraid the swastika and hooked cross symbol is not visible here. now. In any case, in Finland, I might show you the symbols afterwards. There's been this debate almost throughout the independence of Finland, roughly 100 years, that Finland is the country in Western Europe and in Western world more generally where swastika use or hooked cross symbol use, I will use the terms interchangeably a little bit, is still prevalent, because in much of the geopolitical West, swastika was quite common in many uses: commercial, decorative, political, to symbolize a nation, etc., before the Second World War. But when Hitler became more important, and especially when Germany lost the war, just about everybody stopped official use of the swastika. Of course, there have always been political groups or religious groups or mystical groups using the symbol in the West. But the kind of more widespread and sometimes official use, even by states, of the swastika was stopped and discontinued in the West, except in Finland. And that's why in Finland there's been debate that comes up every now and then, especially by foreigners who say, hey, why are you using that Nazi symbol? And then Finnish people say, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's our traditional symbol. Don't confuse it with that symbol. And I realized nobody had really made a profound study of the subject. So I've written a book where I study world history of the swastika, and then also to place in comparative context and world political context the way the swastika or hooked cross symbol is used in particular countries, especially Finland, but also a little bit India, Mongolia, Japan, China, and several European countries, as well as indigenous groups in the Americas. But I don't go there to all these details, but I want to share with you some ideas about how it's being used in Europe, what is the history of the symbol in Europe, and what is the history politics, the uses of the history of the symbol, the real history or perceived history or claimed history about the roots and origins and the meanings of the symbol when it's being used in Europe, especially in political contexts. And I must remind you, it also has many kinds of decorative uses that are at least not apparently political. And I was quite surprised to realize that it hasn't been studied more in academic sense. And I don't think it's the moment to go deep into theoretical exposition of politics of representation and all that, but perhaps very briefly, and also because as Dr. Basu was saying, there are important Bangla or Bengali scholars in the world. I can refer to another one, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, because we look at the symbol, and the symbol symbolizes, it represents something. And the core meaning of representation, I believe, is to make present something that is not really present. So it's always imperfect, which is also why symbols are often open to many historical and political interpretations, because since if it claims to represent a nation, or if it claims to represent exclusion of somebody, let's say the Jews, let's say the Muslims, then you can always say, well, I didn't really mean it, because the meaning is always a little bit unclear. But one main thing, and now we are speaking in English, is that in English language, there's one word representation to refer to two, sometimes more, but at least two different aspects that in many other languages have different words. I don't know how it is in Bengali actually, but the Bengali origin scholar Gayatri Spivak has referred to these two different uses as representation as a portrait. The swastika portrays something. In Finland, we could claim that our hooked cross portrays the nation of Finland in many ways. In Germany, a little bit similar. Sometimes it can portray a religious sentiment or something. But then there's also representation as a proxy, how a member of parliament represents something, the nation, for example. And these are very different things, and they often get confused when we talk about representation, especially amongst political scientists. Like many here, we think of the political meaning of representation, and we think more of parliaments than portraits. But both are politically important. And in my book, I actually claim that the way swastika or hooked cross has been represented as a portrait of a nation is connected also on who can represent the nation as a proxy more politically and who is excluded. And here there are differences. For example, in Germany, one of the main exclusions symbolized by the swastika were the Jews, whereas in Finland, one of the main exclusions was the Russians. The swastika, as I will talk briefly about, I don't want to bore you with too many details about Finnish history. We have time to discuss, return more to that. But one of my claims is that in Finland, hooked cross came to symbolize Finnish nation, and it meant also a desire to liberate Finland from yoke of imperial Russia. And the moment came with Russian Revolution in 1917 when Finland becomes independent. In Finland, actually, most people have think when you ask about, so what about swastika hooked cross in Finland? 99% of Finnish people will tell you it's not political at all. It has nothing to do with political, because there's so much emphasis on making sure that foreigners don't think it's somehow connected to the Nazis, that we want to think of it as a totally non-political symbol. And as a political scientist, we, like many of the people listening to this, I guess, are political scientists or students of political science. Of course, we tend to see politics in many places where others don't see it. And I've been looking with my political science eyes at the symbol, and I tend to look at things that I find as political. And it's been a fascinating journey. So in my also to give one of the ideas of what swastika symbolized in Europe and in Finland in particular, also we'll talk more about Germany soon, is that it symbolized, and it started symbolizing in the early 20th century, belonging to the West. This was particularly important in Finland, where there was some confusion and there were perception that Finnish people were, because our language is not an Indo-European language, and the theories of language and theories of race were intertwined in many ways in the 19th century, and Finnish people were often classified as non-Western or not white Europeans. And the use of the swastika very much, not only, but very much symbolized the desire to belong to the West. We are the West, and Russia there belongs to the Orient. Russia is the other, and by using the swastika, we symbolize our desire to get rid of the colonial master of Russia. I'm simplifying a little bit. And then it's been fascinating, this geopolitical significance of the swastika changed in the world significantly with Hitler. And in the geopolitical West, since the Second World War, swastika's meaning has become very different. It's become almost a taboo symbol. And in particular, it has not been very much, it's been feared and sort of not liked in many parts of the West. And since Finland is the only country, or the country where the official use of the swastika has continued after the Second World War, there's a fascinating story about now when Finland wants to become more Western nation. Finland joined NATO a couple of years ago, as you may be aware, after Russian attack in Ukraine in 2022. So in Finland, there's been this realization that the symbol we always associated with belonging to the West is not so compatible with the geopolitical West anymore. And I will come back to this in a moment. And also this wanting to belong to the West created many confusions, complications, and contradictions with the initial idea in Germany and in Finland also that, okay, swastika symbol or hooked cross symbol comes from the East. In particular, India is often the place where the roots of the swastika have been located. Sometimes it's been Mongolia, especially 100 years ago, there were more references to Mongolia, since use of the swastika was discontinued in Mongolia when Mongolia was under Soviet influence. Mongolia is not so much talked about these days. But in any case, this idea of where are the roots of our people, our nation, and the symbols we use to symbolize our nation became very important when countries became independent and started referring to modern nationalism in the modern sense. And especially in Germany, when Germany was reunified in 1871. The search for national symbols to symbolize the glorious past that most nations want to find and construct was sometimes associated with the swastika, and I'll come back to that in a second. But perhaps a brief world historical reflection, as it is arguably one of the oldest symbols in the world. It's kind of simple, you know, the hooked cross swastika symbol, so it's been found in most parts of the world historically. And in the late 19th century, it started becoming more fashionable. And one of the reasons was that in 1871, the same year that Germany was reunified, German archaeologist, or really a businessman who wanted to be an archaeologist, was one of these archaeologists who go to places and, you know, illegally rob things from there, and that history of colonialism is filled with, found what he thought, and actually now I think he was right there, were ancient ruins of Troy as the mythical city in the Greek legends of Homer and others. 1871, and there were many swastikas in the remains that he found in this archaeological site in Troy. And then a debate, a conversation started about what kind of interpretation can we make about these symbols. And there were many. Of course, the symbol had been used also in the Near East and in the Eastern Mediterranean region, and that was one clear context. But the so-called Aryan hypothesis was already around. The idea that started around very late 19th century, first with the discovery of the fact that Sanskrit language and languages derived from Sanskrit in the Indian subcontinent and many European languages were connected, similarities and historical studies, and I assume this is a historical fact also. And since linguistics was in the minds of the social sciences that were emerging at the time, sometimes connected with racial theories, there was this idea that there was this Aryan race, I'm sure you know all about this, that perhaps had its origins somewhere in the Indian subcontinent, maybe in a remote village in the Himalayas or somewhere. The stories are always a little bit vague. But when the swastikas were found in the ancient ruins of Troy in today's Turkey, some people started suggesting that those represent a kind of missing link between the sort of whole Aryan sort of migration of ideas and people and symbols between today's India, Iran, and then today's Europe. And little by little, they were also connected to anti-Semitic interpretations. There was, for example, one French professor who wrote to this archaeologist, Heinrich Schliemann, about how this symbol, the hooked cross, by the way, Schliemann didn't want to call it swastika at the beginning, at least. He thought calling the symbol swastika would take our mind too much towards India, and he didn't want to make that conclusion. But many others started using the term swastika, and little by little, the interpretation with the budding anti-Semitism, hatred, and desire to exclude Jews was emerging also in Europe, and the symbol was connected to those debates. It's a symbol that the Jews have abandoned, was one argument. Historically, it's not so true. You can find the symbol also in many synagogues, or at least some synagogues. But in any case, that was the argument. And little by little, swastika got more prominent in the circles of German nationalism, and especially of the kind of German nationalism that emphasized race. The idea that there are master races and that there are inferior races. It wasn't necessarily anti-Semitic. It wasn't necessarily always that the inferior races are Jews. And actually, often in these first racial theories of the 19th century, the idea was that the Jewish are intelligent and all that. And anti-Semitism is a little bit more complicated than some other racist theories. In any case, my point here is that the connection between the swastika, racialized nationalism or racist nationalism, and anti-Jewish sentiments was growing in 1880s and 1890s. One of the big moments was World Exhibition in Paris in 1889, when a Polish sort of scholar or some kind of scholar made a big exhibition and claiming it's a anti-Semitic term. So in Germany, it became widely used in nationalist circles that had increasingly anti-Semitic tendencies already in 1880s and 1890s. Often in debates in places like Finland, there's this idea that Hitler invented the swastika as a sort of racist symbol in 1920. And that's why in Finland people often say, since Finnish Air Force, for example, started using the symbol in 1918, it can have nothing to do with that. But things are clearly more complicated. So Hitler's use of the swastika, he made a particular use of the symbol, and it was first of all, it was sort of you could say right facing, which means that the upper hook shows to the right. And there was some debate in the initial Nazi party meeting whether it should face left or whether it should face right. And it had been used a little bit to both sides in the racist groups in the previous decades. So that became established. Then colors in some use, and especially in the flag. Hitler was very fond of the red color, which had been color of the Imperial Germany. And it was also a color that he thought the communists were using successfully. It's a powerful color. So he wanted to take red as an important background in some versions of the swastika. And here we have some confusion about whether it's tilted or not. So whether it's like facing, since I don't have I can show, for example, here. So here is the flag. I don't know now whether it's, you can see it in, sort of reverse. I don't know if you see the text, whether it's the real text or it's in reverse, and this is also in reverse. In any case, here I show you that the flag, as we always remember it, it's tilted, whereas here would be a Buddhist swastika. This is an important book by T.K. Nakagaki, a Japanese origin monk who wrote this wonderful book. So in Finland and in India, I've seen many references that, okay, our swastika is different because it's not tilted. It's but that's not exactly correct. I mean, it's not correct to say that the German Nazi swastika would always be tilted. There are many, and I will show you slides if I knew how, to show how in Nazi Germany, Hitler himself and others used the swastika also in a non-tilted version. In any case, so this was Hitler's use, and I think the story about how then the Nazi use of the swastika became prevalent. Many people, many institutions stopped using the swastika already in at least in early 1930s. And we can take the example of, for example, Rudyard Kipling, who I think you are probably aware of, who said he stops using it as his personal symbol of luck because of the German Nazi use of it. In the United States, many indigenous groups. In the United States, there have been, especially the Navajo indigenous group that has used the swastika before the Nazis. They discontinued its use because they thought it had been desacralized by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. So its use went down in many ways, also as a commercial symbol. And something interesting to remember, now there are debates about whether use of swastika should be made a criminal offense in some Western countries, and in Germany to a certain extent is. And the first real kind of prohibition, legal prohibition of the use of the swastika was actually made by the Nazis when the Nazis became a national government in Germany in the early 1930s. Joseph Goebbels, who was in charge of the propaganda and information sections of the state, prohibited non-authorized use of the swastika, which is also around the time when many commercial enterprises stopped using the swastika or hooked cross as their symbol. It had been used, for example, by Coca-Cola in their advertising, or Carlsberg, a big beer producer, and many others. But so by the Second World War and its end, its use was discontinued in most places, but not in Finland. And maybe a few words, I try not to bore you too much with Finland here, but just to understand different European uses of the symbol. I think Finland and Germany are two of the key places in Europe, and also to understand how the claims of our swastika being separate from the Nazi swastika are something that are present everywhere, including India. And we can, towards the end, I maybe say a couple of words about India. But in any case, here the swastika emerged as a symbol used first in 1889, perhaps coincidentally, in the Paris exhibition, where the racist use of the swastika became prevalent in Europe. A Finnish author, painter, Akseli Galén-Kallela, known as Akseli Galén, used the symbol in a very important painting in Finnish history, and it started to appear it was kind of debated to what extent it's an important Finnish symbol, truly Finnish symbol that could be found in some folklore, in some old textiles, in some other sort of uses that predate the late 19th century. Little by little, it was used also by more political groups. For example, Naiskagali, a women's group opposing Russian imperial rule in Finland. They sometimes used the hooked cross in their actions, but it wasn't that widely used until the independence. 1917, 1918, Finland becomes independent, and it's used in the presidential flag. It was used in the most important sort of medallions that the state gives to distinguished people. It was used by the biggest male sort of national defense-oriented organization, which was one of the biggest in the world. You could call it also a paramilitary organization, and a similar women's organization. And we had a very bloody civil war in 1918 between the so-called whites and the reds. Let's simplify the bourgeoisie and the working class. Things are always more complicated than that. And it became a symbol of those who won the civil war, the whites. It symbolized white Finland in many, many senses. In today's debates, it's often claimed that it had nothing to do with the Nazi use at the time. And to some extent, you could exaggerate in both directions too much, but the story is a little bit more complicated. Just to give you one example, the Air Force, Finnish Air Force, that uses and still uses the swastika as a symbol, though to a lesser extent than before, with integration in NATO and integration in Western organizations, its use has been downgraded a little bit. So the Air Force gets its hooked cross symbol in 1918, March 1918, during the Civil War, and it's a German count, a German elite aristocrat who flies his personal plane, or he buys a plane to fly to Finland to help Finnish troops, and he paints swastika as his personal luck symbol. And he's been revered in Finland since then as the person who brought the swastika to the Finnish Air Force. And the Air Force is the place where the swastika or the hooked cross has been most visible and most debated in Finland. And here we have this history-political argument that this was 1918 and Hitler invents the swastika for racist use only in 1920. As I've shown you and argued, and many have argued before me, this is it existed as a racist symbol much before. But this does not mean that the Finnish swastika would be so connected to the German swastika. But let's think about it. An interesting fact is that this German count was not a Nazi, of course, because nobody was a Nazi in 1918. Hitler was not a Nazi. Hermann Goering was not a Nazi. He was not a Nazi, but he became a Nazi. He became one of the most prominent Swedish National Socialists, known as Nazis, and he also became brother-in-law with Hermann Goering, one of the main Nazi leaders of Germany, and he also became personal friend of Adolf Hitler. But of course, in 1918, he was just an ordinary right-wing nationalist political figure, many of whom, not all, but many of whom in Northern Europe were using the swastika. Not everybody became a Nazi. He did. So in recent history political debates in Finland, it seems to me that the Air Force has slightly downplayed the role they give to this person. But still, the use of the swastika also had roots in Finnish national romantic arts, as in the paintings I referred to. And also it was used in airplanes in many parts of the world, and it did have this significance as a symbol of luck. And if we think about airplanes of 100 years ago, or a bit more than 100 years ago, they often fell down. There were so many crashes, also in Finnish first military airplanes, that they certainly needed luck. So I think it makes sense to think that the use and the significance of the hooked cross or swastika symbol in the West can also be explained as a symbol of luck. And this interpretation of swastika's deepest meaning as a symbol of luck was became prevalent by a historian at the United States National History Museum, the one today known as the Smithsonian Institute. He wrote in 1890s, probably the first really important history of the uses of the world's oldest symbol, as he said. And he sort of established as one of the key meanings of the swastika being a symbol of luck, and he associated this very much with India. So when we think about this symbol and its use in Finland and other parts of Europe in 1920s, 1930s, there was this connection with the racist theories and racist use, but it was also a decorative symbol, national symbol, and a symbol of luck. So it's complicated to try to think about which meaning was prevalent at what point. And I certainly don't want to exaggerate the sort of political significance of the swastika of the time. In Finnish historiographical debates, it's that dimension has been downgraded quite a lot. So perhaps briefly, and to maybe start coming towards the end, a few words about how then its geopolitical change in the swastika with 1930s and 1940s in the West becomes visible in a place like Finland, which was the only Western country using it significantly. So after the Second World War, it was no longer present in the airplanes where it had been present in military airplanes until then, but just about every other official use of the swastika continued, unlike elsewhere. So it was still in medallions, crosses, official crosses given to dignitaries, foreign dignitaries in particular. It was in the presidential flag, though here we should remember that the length of the hooks, of the hooked cross matters. And sometimes when it's used with shorter hooks, it doesn't really look so much as the German symbol. I've sometimes used the term degree of visual Nazishness, and the visual Nazishness of the symbol with shorter hooks is clearly less than of the symbol with longer hooks. In Finland, longer hooks are used by the Air Force and shorter hooks are used in the presidential flags, and the symbol in the presidential flag is not debated as much as the Air Force symbol because of this. So the Finns, in any case, it was taken out of most places and here you see, I think now you see the Finnish traditional Air Force symbol in one of its uses. Most Finnish people think it doesn't look anything like all. Visually, it has nothing to do with the Nazi swastika. And foreigners are normally, well, I'm not so sure about that. In any case, this symbol, more or less the hooked cross in the middle, was then discontinued in the Air Force in 1944. Now I don't see, now there might be a different but it was the symbol was present in one of in the cross of the most important cross that is given to foreign dignitaries. And in 1956, about 12 years after the war, Russian chairperson of the Supreme Council, Clement Voroshilov, was visiting Finland, and he had been given this cross of the Order of White Rose, the highest sort of medallion given to foreign dignitaries, and it had very visible swastikas that were actually tilted because they were on its chain. And he was using it in a cocktail party after he had gotten it, when he was visiting it. And Finnish people were looking like, hey, there's a Soviet leader and he's wearing a swastika without making any fuss about it. Maybe we've self-censored ourselves too much. Maybe we shouldn't have gotten rid of the swastika in the Air Force and somewhere else. And then soon after, there's a correlation, which is not necessarily causation, but I think the atmosphere, in any case, it helped to create an atmosphere that the Air Force started reusing the swastika, no longer in the airplanes, but in their flags and in their different insignia. And here you can see an example how it looks in one of the flags of the Air Force since the late 1950s. And so it seemed like, okay, swastika hooked cross has made a comeback. The Russians don't mind it, so we are happy to use the swastika. But then come certain realizations when Finnish dignitaries and Finnish military people start visiting the West more and more. And the first important moment was 1962 and 63 was the period when Finnish President Urho Kekkonen went to visit Charles de Gaulle in France. And he gave the same medallion with swastikas, twilted swastikas in the chain to General and then President Charles de Gaulle, leader of France. And then it created a conversation in Finland that supposedly Charles de Gaulle was in the cocktail party, not like the Soviet leader like this, but put his jacket here so that the swastikas couldn't be seen. And Finnish people started thinking, maybe in France they don't like that symbol, and the resistance against the Nazis and all that. It's a little bit unclear what de Gaulle really thought. His memoirs, he'd never finished his memoirs to that point because he got ill, but it was assumed in Finland that it's maybe not so cool to give Nazi-looking swastikas to Western dignitaries anymore. And the president of Finland decided that in this medallion given to foreign dignitaries, the change should be changed, and they got rid of the hooked crosses there. Then there were many incidents where little by little Finland gets more integrated with the West. Finland always had a geopolitically special relationship with Soviet Union. A little bit like India, perhaps, but different. And of course, we are a neighboring country. And then when military airplanes were bought from the West, from the United States, and the Air Force people go with their swastikas here and there, and they get to answer many annoying questions. Hey, why are you wearing a swastika? Are you Nazis or what? Or something like that. So they started getting rid of the swastika first in business card, then in other parts. And now that Finland has been approaching NATO, with Germany, for example, there was a couple of years ago an incident. German Air Force comes to practice in Finland. And they spend a few days, doing the kinds of practices Air Forces do. And then there's the final ceremony. And the Finnish Air Force puts up a flag, very similar to the one you see on the screen now. And they tell the Germans, all right, we have the final ceremony. And the Germans look like, what? And yeah, we put up this flag. It has nothing to do with your flag. That's prohibited in Germany. And finally, the Germans say, sorry, we can't attend the final ceremony of our shared exercise because we are Germans. We cannot be in front of a swastika or a hooked cross or Hakenkreuz. And these kinds of elements have made the Finnish Air Force little by little try to get rid of the swastika. One problem is if they get rid of it too openly, it might mean for them that they kind of confess that there was something wrong with the Finnish hooked cross in any case. So it's been an interesting process to follow. And there's now, if I try to finalize a little bit, there's this debate about whether it makes sense, whether it's rational, whether the benefits of using the swastika as a symbol by, let's say, Finnish military are weight more than the downside and the reputational damage and all that. And that's one kind of debate. But there's also a debate in many Western countries and Western Europe, and it started, of course, in Germany, about criminalization of the use of the swastika. And this is a big debate. Memory laws, Germany has been, and in some sense in Europe, Finland and Germany are two opposite sides. In Germany, much of the use of the hooked cross symbol is prohibited by law, whereas in Finland, it's not, except if you can establish that it's been used by hate groups in certain violent actions. And here maybe I come to the importance of India today. India's growing importance in the world, whatever we think of, the current government and growth of India and Indians' entry in the world politics, which, by the way, was highlighted by how Indian foreign minister was seated in the inauguration of Donald Trump. He got a very prominent place, I think, more than Japanese foreign minister, for example. And I think the first person that the foreign minister, the state secretary of Marco Rubio of the US called of the foreign dignitaries was a call he made to India. So okay, India is becoming more important. And one dimension here is that Indian traditions and symbols become more visible in the world. For example, you have many more Indian students, as you know, in Western universities than you had many years ago. And one of the things I've been following and studying a little bit, debates on the use of the swastika also in Indian diaspora, sites and podcasts and all that. And one of the complaints I sometimes hear is like a typical situation is when an Indian student goes to a student dorm in a university, let's say in the United States or Australia or England or somewhere, and then puts her or his traditional symbol of luck somewhere visible. And then the classmates or others get confused, and it becomes a problem because people are not aware in the West of the fact of the traditional use of the swastika in India. And I think today in legal proposals to criminalize the use of the swastika in the West, and there are many debates from Australia to United States and in Europe. It is much more than, let's say, 20, 15 years ago. There's a clause of exception that says, and often specifically refers to the use of the swastika in dharmic Indian religious traditions, sometimes mentioning Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, and which is also one of the ways in which India has become a new kind of reference in the swastika debates in Europe. Because before, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, the presence of India in the debates in Europe around this symbol was like whether its roots are in India. And what does that mean, that it has roots in India? And today, with growth of India as a world political actor, Indian presence can also be seen in how the regulation about the use of the swastika takes place in the world. There was also a famous meeting of representatives of Indian religious organizations and Jewish religious organizations, I think in Jerusalem, where then there was a shared agreement that the use of the swastika by Indian religious traditions should not be forbidden, and that it was recognized that even though for many Jewish people it represents a symbol of hate, it can also have another meaning as a symbol of the kind it has for many Indians. By the way, in the diaspora debates, Indians in the world and abroad, sometimes comes up also this dimension of the political use of the swastika today in India, and especially by groups like RSS traditionally that have been using the swastika and sometimes called soldiers of the swastika. And I've seen fairly angry reactions sometimes if somebody brings that up in a conversation, to how those kinds of attempts to connect the sacred symbol of Indians with exclusionary political movements, especially in the context of hatred towards Muslims in India, how that is a smear campaign trying to smear and put dirt on Indian nationalism and all that. So this is one of the debates I've noted around the Indian use of the swastika. But this is more or less the situation now. And that's a very last point about the future. One thing I've been studying a little bit is what will be the future of the swastika in times of algorithmic controls becoming more automated. Because we are in a situation where much of speech, symbols, words are circulated in platforms, not on social media and different kinds of platforms. And there's been a lot of talk about how it should be regulated. And since the amount of traffic is so big, obviously at least some of the regulation is done by automated algorithmic mechanisms. Often there are humans behind it, but there's a tendency to go towards more automated part. And one of the big questions is how symbols like this, where if you only look at the form and the design, the visual impact of it, it might be difficult for gatekeeper of what is forbidden and what is not in any place where speech and symbols and words are shared, to decide whether it should be totally allowed, whether there should be a stamp put on it like, look, this is or resembles the symbol that is prohibited in Germany, for example, and or whether it's okay. And these open big questions about how the control of the use of the swastika will develop in the future. So it's not only the legal debate about whether there should be a criminal law prohibiting certain symbols or certain expressions, or the sort of benefits versus harms of using it kind of debates. For example, if it's useful for the military to use it for purposes of national defense. But there's also the algorithmic dimension of how algorithmic automated gatekeepers will recognize what should be forbidden and what should not be forbidden. So now I've probably bored you more than I should have. So I'm happy to stop here. And if there are, I don't know, questions, comments, I'm happy to continue the conversation. Also, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you want to comment or ask questions. Later, you can easily, if you see my name, you Google my name, you find my email and my details in Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, X, whatever, very easily. Nobody else has my name, Teivo, Teivainen. So it's easy to find. Thank you also for those future comments that anybody might send me.
Thank you so much, Professor Teivainen. Thank you so much for an interesting exploration. We are now inviting questions. Prakash? Prakash, are you there? In the meantime, I have two questions. first question is that the Nazi leader Hitler, his principles of anti-Semitism were associated with the principles of white supremacist politics. Now, my question is, if he had to borrow a symbol from the ancient world, a symbol which holds high the Aryan race, the identity of the Aryan race, if he had needed this, then why did he look for such a symbol from India, from a non-white people? And while we know that he considered that the non-white people are mostly inferior, uncivilized, and barbarian, then why did he at all choose to prefer to take a symbol from Indian culture, I mean Hindu culture, and also in the context of the situation that India was a British colony at the time, why did at all Hitler take the risk of identifying a subjugated people with a glorious cultural heritage? Why did he choose that? Particularly when he was going to declare war against Britain. I mean, I refer to Second World War. Then, knowing full well that India was a British colony, he risked his aspirations for a pure master Aryan race by incorporating one of the most important cultural symbols, the Swastika. There are so many symbols in different cultures of the world and ancient cultures as well. So I don't understand why India, why Hinduism, why Swastika. We know that in Sanskrit, this Swastika word is coming from the Sanskrit, I mean the etymological origin, that Shu, Swasti. Shu means good, well, and Swasti means being, existence. So somehow this Sanskrit term, it is coming from India, a non-white cultural people. Is there not was it not a bad choice for Hitler, who was pronouncedly racist, white supremacist? This kind of adoption of a symbol from a non-white culture could have endangered his claim to white superiority, or the superiority of the German race. This is my first question. Am I clear to you?
Oh, yes, it's an excellent
Okay.
question. Yes.
Okay. And my second question is, you have, in your talk, you have referred to different contemporary responses, debates controversies regarding the use of the symbol of swastika in European culture, particularly in Finnish culture of Finland. My question is, when people are favoring the symbol of swastika, do they have in mind a kind of silent preference for Nazism? Or do you imply, do you want to imply that a considerable number of people in Finland or in other parts of Europe, they have sort of restored the inclination towards Nazism by their preference for the symbol of swastika? Can we relate anyway this preference with the resurgence of uh, kind of neo-Nazism? We know there is a rise of neo-Nazism in different parts of Europe, even in Germany. You said that in Germany the swastika symbol has been banned, but we at the same time we know about the uh, bald-headed people, their movements, the neo-Nazis, the murder and attack, murder of and attack upon the non-white people, black people in particular. Also in England, we know that murder of that uh, non-white person in the metro station a few years back. So, uh, this preference for swastika, does it have anything to do with the recent resurgence of neo-Nazism? I mean, apparently, they uh, try to show that their preference for the symbol of swastika has nothing to do with politics. It is a non-political concept of swastika. They wanted to demarcate it from the Nazi use of swastika. But is it only a superficial claim? In depth, the what is flowing underneath uh, as an undercurrent, there is a subconscious preference for Nazi politics, especially when people are very much aware of the problem of immigration, especially illegal immigration uh, from Africa, from Latin America, also from Asia, and different governments are refusing shelter uh, to these uh, immigrants. And we know that President Trump of USA recently declared an open policy uh, of punishing the immigrants, illegal immigrants. And already more than 200 people have been sent back to India, including people from Gujarat, Punjab, and Haryana. And does it have anything to do, I mean, this kind of racism or white supremacist policy, does it have anything to do with the use of cultural symbol, with the misuse? In your language, it is the misuse. This misuse of cultural symbol of swastika. We know that, as you already mentioned, Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, the theory of representation, and we are reminded of the very powerful weapon of culture, using the symbols, cultural symbols. And if we look beyond the specific context of Finland, if we look beyond uh, Europe, then today's world politics is giving the signals of a very dangerous policy of racism, especially dangerous for the non-white people. And are you going to place your research on Swastika in the broader political context of this world situation? Maybe that on the margins of your discussion, which have not been mentioned very loudly, but are you trying to indicate that this concern for Swastika, although there are some formal, superficial acts of decline, that no, we are not connecting to Nazi Germany, our symbol of Swastika is very much non-political, etc., etc. Why I am saying this? Because I have something of the recent Indian politics in my mind. So, by apparently declaring the policy of detachment of the symbol of Swastika from Nazi association, are we actually hiding the fact that there is a renewed rigor for racism? And we have on the backstage, we have from the back door, we are actually surreptitiously the so-called subterranean inflow of Nazi racism, the heinous crimes against the Jews, or the non-whites, or non-Christians. Are you, in fact, trying to draw our attention in an indirect way to this broader context? Sorry if I have talked too much.
Wow. Excellent and big questions about the very good question about why would someone like Hitler choose a symbol with roots in an arguably non-white, non-European place if the idea was to represent the white European master race. So maybe to paraphrase somebody in historiographical debates, we often think, and there's this a little bit myth that Hitler and his followers tried to make, that it was Hitler who invented it in 1920 with his, creative, perhaps evil, but still creative mind. But as we know, people often act under conditions that are not of their own choosing, right? So this historiographical guide suits here as well. The fact that swastika was chosen is clearly influenced and can be to a very large extent, not all of that, and without denying the personal impact of a person like Hitler in the story, but it was already a symbol of the Nazis before the Nazis became the Nazis. I mean, the groups like the Thule Society and many groups called so-called Völkisch groups in Germany since the late 19th century, they were using and they established the swastika in this sort of anti-Semitic and racist context. And it was presented to Hitler. It was not invented by Hitler, though, of course, his own choosing played a role. And I think it is a fact. He didn't talk so much about, or when he talked about choosing it, he was talking about the form and the dynamism and all that. And undoubtedly, the sort of angles and the sort of dynamism of the design played a role, and the colors and all that, but it was already there. So and this contradiction that you point to, and I think I sort of mentioned at least between the lines in my talk, is very fascinating, because one explanation for this is the link between sort of racial and linguistic theories and the 1871 discovery of the ancient ruins of Troy by Heinrich Schliemann and all that. So it got connected, and it was the beginning of a story that in some sense ends or crystallizes in Hitler. But if we think of the, let's say, 1870s, it was perhaps initially, I mean, there was no master plan that, okay, let's devise a symbol that we can relate its roots only to our own past, and that's why it was confusing. But there is, and which I think corresponds well with what you said, my argument is that in Germany there was some kind of attempt to downplay the Asian roots of the symbol along with the time. And we must remember, Hitler didn't call it swastika. Hitler called it Hakenkreuz. Hitler called it hooked cross. So he wasn't the person who would emphasize its Indian roots, but its roots in the racist German use were in debates about its possible origin, or its origin or possible origin in India. So it's a complicated thing, but I think with Hitler and with many people then in the formal Nazi party since 1920, there were more and more attempts to link their symbol that they didn't call swastika in German with sort of Northern European cultural sphere, and you can also find it in Northern European cultural sphere, and it was a little bit, little by little, downplayed that it had roots in India, probably for the reasons you point out. It sounds weird to choose a symbol belonging to a non-white or with origins and roots in a non-white place to symbolize white master race. There's a lot more to study around that. In Finland, a similar and actually a very interesting thing was in Finland, when I read Finnish debates in the 1910s and 20s, that at the same time in Finland there was this idea that we, the Finns, have been classified as non-white, because in the first racial classifications related to the Aryanism thesis and the European racist racial classifications of master races and all that, there was the white and yellow and black, to simplify a little bit. Sometimes there were more, and Finns were painted as yellow, not white, because our language is not Indo-European. So for Finns, there was, for some Finns and Finnish elites, there was a lot of emphasis like, don't paint us yellow, we are white like you Germans. And it was, and in this yellowness, it was often, Finns were referred to as Mongolians, and Mongols or Mongolians. And it was a reference to the yellow race that was sometimes called Mongolian race, rather than the country called Mongolia. But at the same time, there were many talks in Finland about how swastika that we use, or the hooked cross that we use, may have its origins in Mongolia. But little by little, those references got a little bit less and less. So the whitening of the swastika was also linked to the de-emphasizing its possible roots in India. And it's, yes, good, excellent question. By the way, in historiographical terms, it's often assumed that the oldest earliest roots of the symbol are in the Indian subcontinent. And at least my understanding is that that's certainly not the case, and that there are findings that are much older, from especially the oldest finding in most scholarship is assumed to be something found in today's Ukraine, some 15,000 years ago, whereas the findings in the Valley of India are much younger. But that's another debate about, well, we may not want to go there. We could go there. But it's actually related to your second question, because here I sometimes jokingly say, like, the oldest hooked cross or swastika symbol was found in Ukraine. So don't tell Putin, he might find new ammunition for his claims that the Ukrainians are Nazis. And this is also related to your second question. We look at the Russia-Ukraine war and Russian invasion and all that. We have one side pointing to like the Wagner group, the mercenaries related to the Russian state, and Putin, whose leader was killed and who have been partially dissolved. He was known to, the main military leader of the group was known to have swastika tattoos or hooked cross tattoos. And then on the Ukrainian side, you have this Azov brigade, one particular brigade fighting against the Russians. And they have been seen also wearing swastika hooked cross symbols and tattoos and all that. So on both sides, there have been like political uses of, look, our adversaries are using the hooked cross and therefore they are Nazis and we are fighting against evil. So this connection with Nazis and neo-Nazis has been present since the Second World War in Europe. In many cases, I studied several occasions there, and in my for example, about Finland, your direct question about whether I'm trying to argue about the sort of secret Nazi preferences or something. It's more complicated than that. For example, before the war, Second World War in Finland, openly national socialist groups were very small. They were using also swastika. They didn't try to claim it's so different from the German use and all that. After the Second World War, there have been sporadic appearances of the use of the swastika by groups that range from very small ultra-right fringe Nazi style or neo-Nazi style groups, sometimes using it in a carnivalistic way, sometimes using it to provoke, saying, okay, we're using the swastika, but we use it to show that the state is hypocritical and doesn't allow for freedom of expression. And there are also neo-Nazi groups that are very explicit that they don't want to go towards the kind of swastika carnivalism that some other Nazi groups have used, because they think the symbol is not useful anymore, and therefore they prefer to use other symbols and specifically not to use the swastika symbol. So there's also one dimension. There is the debate about possible false flag uses of the swastika, like whether somebody uses swastika appearing somewhere, hooked cross appearing somewhere. Is it an expression of, let's say, ultra right-wing racist groups and ideologies appearing, or is it an attempt by their adversaries to paint them as Nazis? And sometimes it's complicated. There was this major event, probably the biggest, often called the biggest appearance of anti-Semitism in Western Europe after the Second World War, in the so-called swastika epidemic. This is how it's called in English, in late 1959, first in Germany, and then in France, UK, United States, where swastikas, hooked crosses, started appearing in many places, synagogues, for example, but also cemeteries and other places, and you could see it when you study the media of the time. It became a big thing, and then there was a debate about, was it something organized by the Soviet Union or the German Democratic Republic, DDR, on behalf of the Russians. And it was also a moment of West Germany entering NATO. It was a moment, and it clearly achieved causing disunion and doubts and debates and division within the geopolitical West. For example, there were arguments, hey, in Germany there are swastikas or hooked crosses. Is Germany a reliable NATO partner? Some people might ask, and did ask, in the UK or the US and all that. And then some people started saying, like, okay, maybe it's the Russians who have been actually doing this, the Soviets. And in my understanding is archival research afterwards, when the archives of East Germany and Soviet Union were opened more, there's some truth to the claim that the Russians and the East Germans actually played a part there. And West German true Nazis, I mean, West German National Socialists after the Second World War, like fringe small parties called Republican parties or something, they did visit East Germany, their supposed adversaries, the communists. And it's a little bit unclear how and what and who was asking whom and what was involved and the incentives. But there are always these debates about who's behind the appearance of that symbol. So what I'm pointing at is that the appearance and the prevalence of racist groups and ideologies in the West is sometimes connected with the swastika use, but there are also racist and even National Socialist inclined groups who never would use the swastika because they think that that's not helpful for their tactical purposes. And then there's also this false flag dimension. So it's in many ways complicated. But yes, I don't know if I answered your questions at all, but these were some things that came to my mind provoked by your wonderful questions.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much. Acha, there is another question from Ajiz Sheikh. What was the protest by Indians whenever the swastika symbol was used by the Nazi force?
Excellent question. I have not studied all the, because for that one should do a perhaps archival study in India about what the reactions were in India, if we are talking about mainly the 1920s and 30s or the earlier periods. I can recommend a wonderful play by Australian theater group. It's actually mentally handicapped people acting in that group, and they have a play called Ganesh versus the Third Reich, and it's a very nice story that of course doesn't give a full answer to the question, but exemplifies a little bit some sentiments there. It's about Lord Ganesh, the elephant-headed Lord, as everybody here knows, of course, who finds out in that period that Hitler has stolen the sacred symbol, the swastika. And so it's about Lord Ganesh traveling to Berlin to persuade Hitler to give back the swastika to the Indians, and it has many great insights. I think it's an excellent piece of theater. I'm not sure if it's available in YouTube or something. Yes, I don't know. That's something I've tried to look at, but I haven't looked very deeply to what extent there is research on this particular topic in India. I haven't found, but I haven't looked widely enough. So if somebody has knows of a book or deep study on that, I'd be very happy. Of course, one has to take into account both the sort of more how did the religious leaders and people in India, especially of the dharmic religions, Hinduists, Buddhists, or Jainists, think about the swastika. Then there was also how did I think the RSS, the group still important in India, I believe, was established in 1920s and at least partially inspired also by Mussolini and to some extent, I believe, also by other expressions of racist nationalism in Europe, including the National Socialists. So their takes on the use of the swastika at that time would be very, very interesting to study. And I have not done that study. I'm actually hoping to study that period more. And also, if we think more generally, the Asian, how the Indian origin religious symbols, how they were, how people, for example, Buddhists who were not only in India but also in East Asia and elsewhere. So there are different stories. Some are very interesting. Some I actually tell in my book also about how in those 1920s and 1930s swastika was used there. And perhaps just to give one example, just to show that it's not always so black and white. Now we normally talk like, okay, our swastika, whether it's Indian swastika, Finnish hooked cross, or something else, it's different from the evil Nazi swastika, right? This is what everybody wants to establish. Our swastika is not evil like the German Nazi one. 1937, Japanese troops are approaching Nanjing, and there's a German Nazi there. He's local director of Siemens, a German company. And evacuation order comes. The Japanese are going to take over, and it actually became one of the most infamous massacres in world history, Nanjing rape, or rape of Nanjing, or massacre of Nanjing. So he says, I'm going to stay. As he was a Nazi, he had swastikas, Hitler's swastikas, the German National Socialist flag. But he also wanted to protect the Chinese, his workers and some others. So he puts the Nazi swastika on the roof of his house and elsewhere to signal to the approaching Japanese that these are safe zones. And I was just in Nanjing a few weeks ago and went to the museum part of Nanjing University's Peace Research Institute, and it was a fascinating case of how this person, who's now called Buddha of Nanjing by many people in Nanjing, who was a Nazi, German Nazi, and was using the Nazi swastika to save lives in Nanjing in 1937, because then the Japanese were less inclined to bomb or attack houses that were signaled as safe houses with the Nazi swastika. So this is an anecdote and maybe not so much explanatory value, but just to remind us that one shouldn't assume always that something is only bad and something is only good, but think so sometimes the politics of using symbols is sometimes may have unintended or surprising twists and turns.
Thank you very much. Prakash, is there any other question?
Sir, one question for me. Sir, is swastika important in European politics?
Well, it's become a symbol that's associated so much with National Socialism and Hitler and French political groups, extreme right, that it's very different from before the Second World War, when it was more widely used. So in most countries, it's considered a symbol of hate, and there's and in some of them, its use in most cases is prohibited. It's the most important nationalist use of the symbol is clearly in Finland, and so the use is not so prevalent, so it's not so important in that sense. It's perhaps more important as something that symbolizes, a symbol that symbolizes the debates on memory laws and what should be forbidden and what shouldn't. A little bit like there are debates on whether denial of the existence of Holocaust should be made a criminal offense or not. That's one debate that has taken place in many Western countries. And it's a little bit similar to the debate on whether certain uses or all uses or most uses of a symbol like the swastika hooked cross, whether that should be made a criminal offense. And as I think I mentioned, the increasing visibility of Indian diaspora, also Indian students and professionals and people who of Indian origin who are more present in many of Western countries. Also more in politics, in the UK and very recently in the US. You've had either successful or unsuccessful attempts by people of Indian origin to become to have very important leadership positions in national politics. So that also, perhaps to the extent some Indians continue using swastika as their symbol, and if the visibility of Indians increases because of migration, because of growing Indian world political importance, then one could think that that will also contribute to making sure that the swastika is not disappearing from Western public spheres. But it has its own, Western historical uses as well. And I think, apart from Europe, United States, there are these like indigenous groups, like the Navajo Indians, you would call them American Indians, indigenous groups there. They have started using their swastika that they use in textiles, in particular, much more openly and proudly, because in the 1940s they made a declaration that they discontinue using the swastika. And now, if we think in terms of, for example, genocides and memories of genocides, some people in the Navajo traditions in the United States would say that the genocide against indigenous people in the United States and the cultural genocide, like making them even bury and discontinues the use of the sacred symbols, was justified by referring to another genocide done by Hitler in Germany. So because Hitler's genocide put swastika, or they call it sometimes whirling logs, the hooked cross whirling log symbol, that got a bad fame. And why should then cultural genocide, arguably cultural genocide of the Navajo, continue because somebody else somewhere else made a genocide against some other people? And now I think the use of the swastika there is a little bit more prevalent than before. By the way, the commercial of the Navajo in the like 130 years ago, 130 years ago, it was an interesting moment also in the indigenous United States American context, that there were railroads, and the Navajo lands in Southwest United States were connected with the East Coast. So people with entrepreneurial mind in, let's say, New York, they would hear that, hey, in Europe there's this, people are crazy about the swastika. They want to see swastikas, and more importantly, they will buy stuff if there's a hooked cross there. So they would go to the Navajo lands and then, okay, give us or sell us rugs or spoons or something, and let's put the swastikas or whirling logs or hooked crosses, whatever they were called, very visible, because we will sell them to the Europeans, because there's this swastika fever going on in Europe. So the Navajos played a role also in or had an interesting role in the initial diffusion of the swastika in Western world, Western Europe and United States. But now they are I don't know, I couldn't quantify it, but I see from art exhibitions and elsewhere, there's like this emphasis, okay, we have restarted using our swastika. And there are groups that there's this more general heterogeneous movement called Reclaim the Swastika. And there are, like, I don't know, new age hippies and religious minded pagan and people interested in West Eastern religions and theosophical, all kinds of religious, cultural, mystical influences, where some people are like, okay, now is a good time to reclaim the swastika and start using the swastika that can be sort of cleansed from its association with the Nazi evil things. So this is one strand of swastika use that we see also in Europe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Teivo, and your discussion has been very relevant, particularly in the context of today, when Indian subcontinent is facing different kinds of oppressions against religious minorities. In India, we witness oppression of Muslim minorities, Christian minorities. In Bangladesh, in Pakistan, we witness oppression of minority Hindus, minority Buddhists. So in these dark times, your discussion seemed to be quite relevant. Thank you very much. I should also thank Dr. Amitabho Sarkar, who was once our student in Scottish Church College, but I am in political science and he was in bioscience. But and I cannot claim that I was his teacher, but he claimed that he was my student. Anyway, he teaches at Geneva Graduate School and also Tampere University in Finland. I am grateful to him. I thank him taking this opportunity that he put me in contact with Professor Teivainen. Thank you very much for your time. This has been a very engaging session. So thank you. It will be uploaded on the YouTube within a couple of days. And I also thank the audience and I thank Rashtrabigyan Charcha Kendra. Prakash, kichu bolbe?
No, sir. Thank you, sir. And thank you, Professor Teivainen. And thank you all the audience. So I will finish in this season. So thank you and good night to all.